And oh my goodness, we have been talking some things in the news the last couple of podcast weeks of UX Bright, but now we're going to dive into more of your expertise. But I mean, just check out the UX Bright podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're hitting things like DeepSeek. We hit things like what was going to happen with the future of IoTs and all that stuff. Just check out the podcast. But today, our topic is common UX mistakes that cost businesses millions. First, define for me what UX means.
Yeah, so UX, especially in the tech industry, means user experience. And for me, that just translates into client experience, right? On the tech side, you're usually using software or interacting with some type of app or some type of online platform. But it really does extend more than just the digital side. It is your client experience through and through. If your product form factor is the software as a service, then you need to make sure you intimately know who you're talking with. And this is where most companies get this wrong, right? I work with a lot of founders, and the fallacy is if I build it, they will come. And they spent all this money building this grandiose project and come to release, and no one wants to buy it. And so, really, the lean startup approach, from what I learned in my CEO experience, is starting off initially interacting with customers, getting early feedback cycles, and really understanding what they really want. User experience is about solving pain points that your customers will gladly pay you money for, right? And so that's what it's all about. And then developing those relationships either through your product or extending that through your marketing or other relationship building. So user experience is one of the most important things, and that's why I named the company UX Bright, because I worked with a lot of founders and a lot of the problems became the same. Hey, Chris, I launched this great product, but it's not catching on. User engagement, and I'm not, and that translates to not getting the revenue. So this doesn't just extend past just an app you're building, Neil. This also has to do with your website, right? If you think about your website as the digital storefront for what your brand is and a representation of who you are, if you don't have that on, you're going to be dead in the water. It is said that you have about 15 seconds when a new visitor comes onto a website before they determine whether they want to stay or not. For some companies, if you don't know what this metric is, that's your website churn rate, right, or bounce rate, which you might be aware of. Yeah, you want people to come onto the website and be amazed. Same thing with the product. Be amazed with the first time the experience. So then that way they can tell their friends about it, right? Because it's all word of mouth. That's part of the business. So it's all relative. And you want to know what a cool fact that I learned, Neil?
What?
According to a study, I think it was Nielsen Marketing Research. They're saying for every dollar that companies spent in user experience and client experience, they returned over $100 worth in return in ROI. So everything that we're talking about here today, through the podcast and all the ways you can connect technology to user experience, this is how you build great products. This is what Steve Jobs understood very vividly, through the design principles that Apple now is not the prowess of. So, yeah, it's incredibly important, and yeah, I take a lot from those great designers in history to really understand, okay, what were the inventions that really worked, that gave us utility, form, and function, and then the ones that just flopped, right? We've seen some terrible inventions throughout the years, I'm sure, right? So how do it's all important.
The user experience, and this is a great point you're making, is involving, and you focus a lot. If we talk about products, that's your jam, especially digital products.
Oh
But
yeah.
you're also focusing on physical products as well, but they all have to be digitally marketed. But when you talk about services, most of your clients, because they see your experience, is software as a service. And
Mm.
that's developing an app, developing something. But you see so many of them not understanding the user experience. And the user experience, once you have this application, how are you going to monetize this application? So important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, right? Obviously, software as a service is one of our bread and butters, but the other biggest piece where a lot of folks come to us is digital transformation as it relates to their business operations, right? So the fact that we can integrate payment systems, different providers with your website form, and really automate some of the business functions that you're doing in your day to day, that improves your client experience. The fact that you can improve your delivery speeds on the operation side. It's going to improve to client satisfaction. And there's a direct correlation to that. So yeah, it's that's one of the biggest other niches that we start to grow into now as well, is that digital transformation side. So still user experience, not forgetting them, right? But also tooling businesses to get to the point where they can achieve the technical visions that they have for themselves.
So when you talk about ignoring these common mistakes, let's just jump right specifically enough.
Oh
One.
yeah,
All right, we
let's.
got we got five to cover, maybe six. No, maybe we'll see how many, but we could cover the next podcast as well. The first one is ignoring user research, and this is interesting. This is such a thing. I see a mistake. We've talked about this in podcasts constantly, but I think you could dive deeper into this. A lot of times when people start a business, they don't do a competitor analysis. They don't look at specific things. But what do you talk about when it's user research? That's a little different than competitor analysis.
Yeah, for some founders, they have this idea and it lives in their head, and they've never told a soul because they think this idea is so grandiose. And here's the thing, guys, ideas are meaningless. Execution is everything. And what you want to be able to do is when you're starting a new idea or concept, you want to start formulating that idea and start talking to people. When you're in your silo and you're not talking with anybody to actually massage and find out what the true pain points are, then you build something that's completely way off than what the market actually wants. So that's the biggest problem that I see, right? Get out of your silos and go talk to customers early on. No one's going to steal your idea. It's really just a matter of you just presenting your solutions and just working with folks and talking with them. The second piece of that I would also say too is not using like empirical data or actual research. There's tons of market publications and studies and Statista. That's a great online platform where you could go in and see what is actually the market opportunity for what I'm building before I actually go in and do it. Because you may build something for a niche software as a service or hardware product, but come to find out it's not scalable. You may not have enough customers, and then that forces you to completely pivot all the way. So that's where you see a lot of companies pivot because they hadn't done enough initial research in the beginning when they first set out. And so that requires them to do that. Now, not to say that pivots aren't bad, but because every great business eventually does a pivot. YouTube started off as a dating platform, if you could believe it, and then they figured out and start talking to users. Well, I would actually like uploading videos better as opposed to talking to dating, right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so start talking with users. What you build initially is not necessarily always going to be the case. So that's where user interviews are going to be great, surveys, and keeping a newsletter to keep informed with folks is going to be your holy grail as it comes to founding products.
I mean, it's so important to talk to your customers, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to potential customers and pitch your idea to people and see
Mm-hmm.
what their response is. If they're not very excited about it, it's time to go back to the drawing board. Like,
Absolutely.
how are we going to really make this happen? What does this make sense? And don't you just make a blanket statement, I have too much competition. Till
Right.
you do the freaking research, you don't know.
Yeah, there's so much you don't know. And sometimes people find that holy grail of like undiscovered competition and niches where people haven't tapped those markets. So yeah, do as much research as you can. That'll give you more competitive edge too, compared to anyone else in the market. But that's just one aspect of common mistakes that people make. Um,
That's one. And we'll go to one more today, and then we'll cover two or three more next week. Overcomplicating the user journey. What does
mm,
that mean?
Yeah, this was something part of the user research, right? I think so I see that this happens when uh founders, sometimes when we start businesses, we may know a certain business or an idea or something very intimately more than others. So in our minds, we become the subject matter experts. And so what happens is we impose what we think is the best route for how the product should be and the product form factor. But again, to that point of not doing user research, you didn't go out and actually test that idea with others, right? So with the user journey, sometimes you build too many complex navigations. If you didn't do like a wireframe of your app or your idea, or like a prototype design, if you're doing hardware, uh, how can people really get an idea or the tangibility of like what you're building? And so yeah, the user journey sometimes can also translate to operation bottlenecks, right? Sometimes you have to click too many things in a form that takes adds up to a couple different hours, and then you have people yelling at you because you're like, "Hey, this is not an efficient process, even though it's digital," right?
Oh,
So you
wow.
also have to be a cognizant of, okay, okay, even if it's digitized, does it make sense from
The
the
number of clicks.
number of clicks? Yeah.
I see this with all these authors. They make the it's so complex. Just buy the thing. Who cares about more information? You get them there, buy it.
Oh
And
yeah.
people don't want the link and buy it. They're not going to waste their time spending hours upon hours and things. All right.
Right.
So,
And that's where you want to use like a designer to help you kind of figure out, okay, what are those elements in the design to help people attract to get to the call to action? That's the most important part. Every user journey should have a call to action. So help me buy something, help me do a feature, help me. It shouldn't just be like, okay, I'm here. Now I'm left all by my lonesome.
all right. So the best place to go is uxbright.com. Check out
Absolutely.
Chris Richards on social media, Christopher Richards, LinkedIn, and keep following UX Bright and Savant podcast. Appreciate it, Chris.